Aloha, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Andrea Nandoskar, and I'm the Education Program Manager at Historic Hawaii Foundation. Thank you for joining us for the fifth lecture for the 37th Annual Historic Preservation Lecture Series. Mahalo to our event partner, Dr. Ralph Kam, the curator of the Expert Series. Dr. Kam is the Executive Director of Hawaiian Mission House's Historic Site and Archives. This series is sponsored by the Historic Preservation Graduate Certificate Program, University of Hawaii at Manoa School of Architecture, and Historic Hawaii Foundation. This year's theme is Hawaii's Historic Preservation Pioneers, and today's presenter will speak about Kenneth Emory. Just a note that all the lectures are being recorded. We had an issue with our live stream to Facebook and YouTube today, so apologies for that. We are recording and we'll post the recording onto our YouTube page after the lecture. And if you have questions, and please put them in the chat box throughout, and we will have time after our presenter completes his portion to hear some Q&A and answer some of your questions. We'd also be grateful if you would take a moment to complete the survey at the end of today's presentation. For those new to Historic Hawaii Foundation, we are a statewide nonprofit that helps people save historic places, sites that tell the stories of the multi-layered history of Hawaii. We do this through education, advocacy, assistance, and protection of and for historic places. We were founded in June of 1974, and we're celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. And now I'd like to warmly welcome Dr. Ralph Kam, who will introduce today's presenter. We hope you enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Andrea. Uh, one of the things I really enjoy about this lecture series is the possibility to, through others, meet the people who are in historic preservation. Uh, I never had the chance to meet Kenneth Emory. I never had the chance to meet William Murtaugh, but we have been able to draw into this series of people who actually worked with them. And such is the case today. Our speaker today is Akihiko Aki Sinoto. He was born in Ichikawa, Chiba, Japan in 1950 and has lived in Hawaii for 67 years. He was at Bishop Museum as a contract archaeologist for 20 years, and he has been a private consulting archaeologist in Hawaii and Micronesia for 33 years. So he was closely acquainted with the Emorys for 35 years. So we have what we like to call an expert. And without any further ado, Aki Sinoto. So
Aki, you're on mute.
in the upper right-hand corner, there should be a button.
Oh, I got it. Yeah, sorry. That's always the Zoom quandary. Okay. Yeah, mahalo, Ralph. Mahalo, Andrea. Aloha, everyone. Yeah, my name is Aki Shinoto. Many of you probably know me. First, a little bit about myself and why I'm talking about Kenneth today. So, I was born in Ichikawa, that's near Tokyo, and I moved to Osaka in 1954 because my dad left Japan to go to California to attend Berkeley because his real interest was in Paleolithic archaeology, but he never got there. Only his ship's trunk with most of his belongings and clothing got there, only to return to Hawaii months later. But the reason was why, because he was shanghaied by Kenneth Emory. when during the ship's 1 week's layover, he visited the South Point excavations being undertaken by Kenneth and some of his colleagues. So he got stuck in Hawaii and really never left. So my mom and I arrived in Honolulu in December of 1957 to join Dad. We lived in Hawaii pretty much ever since and consider it our home. And after my dad wrote and successfully defended his doctorate dissertation in Japan between 1960 and 61, when we returned, the Emorys graciously opened their Nuuanu home to us while we look for housing. That's when I really personally got to know Marguerite and Kenneth very well. And during my early teen years, I often accompanied Kenneth and my dad on their various surveys and gigs and spent many summers in Tahiti. So after high school and attending UH, I started work on contract archaeology projects as an archaeologist. And later I managed projects for the museum, including the H3 Highway project. And I left in 1991 to pursue self-employment as a consulting archaeologist in the Pacific region. Besides projects in Hawaii, work took place largely in the Marianas and Caroline Islands, Micronesia, places like Guam, Saipan, Tinian, Palau. Currently, I'm semi-retired from 2020, and I still consult on some projects for long-term clients from time to time. But today, I'm really happy to share my memories of Kenneth and Marguerite with all of you. And you know, if it wasn't for Kenneth kidnapping my dad in 1954, most likely I wouldn't be here today doing this. So I owe a lot to Kenneth. So let's get started on Kenneth Pike Emory. You know, Kenneth, he was actually born on the mainland. He was born November 23rd, 1897 in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, to his parents Walter Levitt Emory and Winifred Pike. Remember, that sound familiar? Pike's Peak is named after his mother's family. When he was 2 years old, his family moved to Hawaii, and Kenneth grew up on Oahu. So, can we get the first picture, Michelle? The second picture, yeah. So this is a picture of his family, mom, dad, his brother, and Kenneth is sitting on the running board, and their house. Well, you can barely see the house, but it's in the background. It's their first house in Honolulu on Bates Street. And the next one, please. Yeah, so Kenneth grew up here, you know, learned to surf, and he really got fluent in the Hawaiian language as well. And so for college, he attended Dartmouth College and continued his education at Harvard and later received his PhD from Yale. This is over a period of time because from the time he left Dartmouth to when he went back to Harvard to pursue further studies, he had done a lot of adventurous roaming around the Pacific for the Bishop Museum. And so he became affiliated with the museum during and after Dartmouth. And next picture, please. And so in the period right after Dartmouth, the museum sent him on various archaeological exploits. This is Kenneth wearing a suit, landing in Lanai for his Lanai survey on a fishing sampan. So he did a lot of things in Hawaii first, and he was a little bristled at the fact that some of his other archaeologists were going on long South Sea uh, expeditions while he was stuck in Hawaii. But he did his best here while he was waiting for his chance. Next picture, please. And that's him on Lanai recording petroglyphs. And just as an aside, his Lanai report is even viewed today as a very before its time spatial or settlement pattern study, which included many things that archaeologists in his time period never really did. So he was years ahead of his time in his thinking, in his field methods, and also especially his data synthesis and analysis of what all the data he collected in the field. Next picture, please. He even went to Neho Necker and he found all remnant marae type structures. Marae is like the Tahitian equivalent of a heiau. It's a religious structure and usually made of upright slabs like this. And so this would be seen as an archaic type remain in Hawaii. And he found these on and Nectar. Next picture, please. So in 1924, he finally got a chance to go to the South Pacific. And it was through this American tycoon named Medford Kellum, who had converted an old-time transport ship, a trading ship, into a luxury four-masted yacht. It was actually a large boat. It was four-masted, 170 foot, 512 ton. Used to be a commercial sailing ship, and he converted it into a luxury yacht. And for that day, it was amazing. It had all motorized winches. The donkey for the anchor was motorized. Everything was motorized. And it had staterooms and all kinds of things in the luxurious things in the boat. And he also had a bunch of laboratories for all the different scientists that went on this expedition. Entomologists, botanists, marine biologists, and of course, Kenneth. Next picture, please. You know, they didn't have smartphones those days, so Kenneth had to carry all this heavy recording equipment. He had the movie camera, and it says he took about 5 different still cameras. He took chemicals, darkroom equipment. In fact, the first 4 days on boarding the Kaimiloa, he was building a darkroom in below decks so he could use it to process the film when he got to different islands. So he was an amazing person. He did a lot of stuff on his own, learned how to do things, and most of all, he lugged around all this equipment wherever he went. It's amazing. So his Kaimiloa expedition marked the start of his over 60 years of roaming the various distant islands in the Pacific. Next picture, please. So while he was in Tahiti, he kind of got into a dispute with the millionaire owner because he noticed that he wasn't really interested in the scientists. So he sort of got off, had this small cutter built in Tahiti, and he traveled around the Tuamotu Islands with a small crew and his linguist friend, Stimson, and his boat was named Mahine Tepua. And he went all over the Tuamotus, including places that didn't even have a pass through the reef. So they had to just sail the boat right on top of the reef and leave it high and dry until they were ready to go. And the islanders helped them to pull the boat out at sea. pretty incredible stuff that he did. Next picture, please. So while he was in Tahiti, he met this beautiful Papa French Tahitian woman. He promptly fell in love, and he was a real romantic guy. He talked her out of catching the next boat up back to France to finish her schooling, and instead he talked her into marrying him. So for a few months during the honeymoon, they toured around the islands in Tahiti, and she accompanied him on his surveys, and um, was a very good time for both of them. Next picture, please. You can see them dressed in uh, native garb. You know, Marguerite came from a pretty well-to-do family in Tahiti, her French side, and she was also descended from the Ali side of her Tahitian family too. So it was a really a good match for Kenneth because she had the entree into a lot of different places that just outsider couldn't go into. So it was a very good time for both of them. Next picture, please. Here's Marguerite on Huahine at one of the maraes with a native informant. And, you know, by the 1950s, Kenneth became came to be regarded as one of the world's foremost experts on Polynesian culture. And he was recognized as playing a key role in shaping modern anthropology in Oceania. So, like I said, while growing up in Hawaii, he mastered the Hawaiian language. And later, he was able to converse with the peoples from various island groups of Polynesia. And that really piqued his interest too, because he knew that they all came from the same language stock originally. So it got him even more interested in the migration um, question for where the Hawaiian people and the other Polynesian people came from. So a little bit about his dad. When his dad moved to Hawaii, at first he was a superintendent of construction at the Alexander Young Hotel. And then later, with his partner, Marshall Webb, he opened an architectural business in Hawaii. And he planned and designed, well, they planned and designed a number of well-known public as well as commercial buildings in Honolulu. And probably the more notable ones were the Blaisdell Hotel, the Union Trust Building, Hawaii Theater, Cass and Cook Halls at Punahou, and also some buildings at St. Louis School. They also designed the Central Union Church and the Honolulu Advertiser Building, which is still standing on Kapilani Boulevard. And as mentioned from the early picture, their early home was on Bates Street and later in the Dowsett area of Nu'uanu. So next picture, please. So there's Kenneth and his young family with their car, well, back in Hawaii. So this led up to the 1940s and World War II. So during that time, next picture, please. Kenneth engaged in training the military that were to go into the Pacific Theater. He even wrote a handbook to be given to each soldier that was going to be in the Pacific about survival on the Pacific Islands. And he's showing the sergeant how to husk a coconut. And the next picture, please. And he showed them how to build temporary shelters out of materials that could easily be found on these islands. Like he showed them how to make coconut thatch and build simple A-frames from how trees and things like that. So he gave them a lot of practical advice and survival techniques. And it's said that he probably trained over 100,000 soldiers during that time. So soon after the war, there was one very notable expedition that he embarked on, and that was in Kapingamorangi. And it's a island, small island, um, west of Kiribati and Nauru, and even more west of Samoa, Fiji, Tonga. And these are known as Polynesian outlier islands. And they kind of occupy a place that's between Micronesia, Melanesia, and Polynesia. But they still speak the Austronesian language, and they have they're thought of as one of the Polynesian routes along the way from Southeast Asia. So it was a very important another expedition that Kenneth was on, and in this expedition he made actually um, a long film, cinematic film regarding his exploits at Kapingamorangi. Because that island was so isolated, most of the native culture was still there and being practiced. So it was really rare chance for him to record all of these things. Not only, in his research, but also in on film and in movie film. I think that movie is still available in various locations, and it's really a wonderful thing to watch. And in the 1950s, the next slide, please. You see here the crew from the South Point excavations. That's Bill Bonk on the left. Elaine Frisbee, who's a Tahitian lady that her dad was like a boat captain on some of the inter island freighters that Kenneth took when he was in Tahiti. And it's Kenneth, Natalie dressed in the middle with a nice aloha shirt and a lei. And the short guy is my dad, fresh from the uh, Hilo Airport that Kenneth picked him up at. And that's William Solheim on the very right of the picture. Next picture, please. So South Point, of course, they're the Kelly sand dunes, right on the Pali, above the Pali, with well-known burials and sites. But below the cliff at Waiahukini, there were a whole bunch of beautiful cave sites. And the deposit in these caves were very pristine. And I worked there too. And when you first entered a cave, it was like the people that lived there had just left. Like there were still ashes in the fireplace and uh, sitting stones and things, scattered around. It was really a pristine area that was preserved really well because it was on private property and it was very isolated. The only way in was a 2 hour drive through a lava trail or by boat, but there's no um, beach or safe landing, and the rocky shore was like full of fauna, so it was a really well protected area. But in this picture, you see my dad on the left. I don't know who the gentleman between my dad and Kenneth is. That's Kenneth. And right below Kenneth, that's his older daughter, Tiare Emory, and then Bill Baum on the right. And they're looking at this cultural deposit, the real dark soil that covers the cave floor. Next picture, please. And on the Puali'i dune site, as they made the excavations, they came up on post holes and other cultural remains. And if you're familiar with the Polynesian or the Hawaiian fishhook study, this is where most of the fishhooks that were used for seriation of chronological data came because my dad, he was already practicing archaeology in Japan. He was doing Jomon um, period excavations in Japan as well. So he was very versed in the excavation techniques. And whereas Kenneth was just starting out doing excavations because his expertise was really in ethnographies and um, surface surveys, inventories, and anthropology. But he really wanted to show that there was potential for data through excavation because during those days, people from old world, especially old world archaeologists said, "Hey, the Pacific is geologically so young that it's not worth excavating. Everything is too new." That's what they said. So he was really excited when during the same period they excavated a cave on Oahu, Makaniolo cave shelter that was designated Oahu Site 1. It's right near Kuli'o, up on a ridge right behind, at the base of a ridge right behind a private home. And in those days, access was so easy. Yeah, you go up to the homeowner and say, "Hey, we're gonna go dig in your backyard again." It was no problem. They would bring us water and iced tea and stuff, and stay and chat and remarked at what kinds of stuff they were finding. That was a really um, productive excavation. They found tattooing needles, lots and lots of fish hooks, other implements, and it was the very first site to have been radiocarbon dated in Hawaii. And the radiocarbon date came out to about, let's see, do I have that? I think I had it. But anyway, it was around 1100 AD. And Kenneth was so overjoyed because, hey, what happened? Can you still hear me or did I turn off?
No, you're fine, Aki.
Okay.
Keep going.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad it's today because tomorrow, Hawaiian Electric said we're gonna have a blackout up here. Yeah, so we actually got a radiocarbon date and it was a prehistoric date. So Kenneth was excited and showed everybody that, archaeology certainly had potential here. Next slide, please. And then in the 60s, Bishop Museum, Kenneth and my dad had an initiative to go and do further research in Tahiti and look at all the sites that Kenneth had recorded in the 1920s and 1930s together with Marguerite. And this is one of the start of those um, Tahiti investigations. This is on the island of Moorea, and they excavated a site in an area called Whareaitu, and they always had pretty prominent visitors from the mainland, scientists coming to see what was happening, and all the locals always used to participate as well. One of the interesting things about working with Kenneth and my dad is a lot of professors like to take the graduate students or some of their own people along, but Kenneth and my dad always said, "Oh, you got to work with the local people because, they're closer to nature than our students." And I found that to be true myself because they have a really good sense of touch and they can see the different layers in the ground and they're superb workers. And in this case, they're really interested in their own culture and heritage. So they were really beautiful and nice people to work with. There's one really funny story. The very first day they worked together with the local people, everything was okay. And my dad and Kenneth went back to the site the next morning, and he noticed that the foreman of the Tahitian group and two of his assistants, when the day before didn't have glasses, they were all of a sudden wearing glasses. But when they looked at them closely, the glasses didn't have any lenses in it. They were just wearing frames. And so, so they asked them, "Hey, how come you guys are wearing frames? I mean, why were you wearing glasses?" And they said, "Oh, because both of you guys wear glasses and you know way more about our history than us. So we figured we better put some glasses on." Next picture, please. So Kenneth, he always loved his, you know, testimony from the elders and oral traditions. And here during that 1960s initiative, you can see him with Aurora Natua, the woman with the hat, was a local Tahitian historian, and she accompanied us on a lot of our trips, and they're interviewing these villagers. And you can see in during that time, they still lived in very traditional looking houses with thatch. This one tends, I think, is a pandanus thatch roof, bamboo walls, and it's sitting on top of a platform. So that's a real traditional type house. And people lived in those houses until just maybe 40 years ago. It was really a beautiful scene. Next picture, please. So this is a picture of the museum crew, Department of Anthropology crew in the around the 70s. Some of you may notice some of the people. Of course, this is Kenneth, third from left, my dad. Next to him is Marion Kelly next to my dad. In front of my dad on the ground with glasses, that's Adrian Kepler. And next to her on the ground with the flower in her hair, of course, is Pat Bacon. And standing behind her is, he was a Canadian archaeologist. He did some work at the museum with my dad, and he went on to specialize in Okinawa. And next to him, the blonde fellow, that's Dr. Ben Finney. And he's from Harvard. He was a waterman. He was an enthusiastic surfer and canoe paddler. And he even went on the first Hokulea voyage. And next to him is Pila, or William Kikuchi, who also worked with my dad and Bennett. And he went to Samoa with my dad to do archaeology. He eventually became a professor of archaeology at Hawai Community College. So there's a bunch of people. Oh, interestingly, the woman kind of half hiding in the background under that plumeria tree, that's Mari Mari Kellum. You know, remember the tycoon that had the Kaimiloa, the luxurious yacht? That was her great, oh, that was her grandfather, in fact. And the Kellums still live in Tahiti, and they live in Moorea, in the back of one of the beautiful bays in Opunohu Valley. So I'm sure her parents have passed away, but Mari Mari still lives there with her son, and they go way back. Next picture, please. So this is actually the last formal portrait taken of Kenneth. And this one appears in Bob Krause's book called Kennetti. And he dates this picture to 1968, but I don't think it is. I think he meant, I think it's a typo. I think this is like in 1988, just like 4 years before his passing. Because in 1968, he was still in the middle of the reinvestigation of Tahiti. So yeah, he looks a little bit more frail here, but Kenneth had a a long and wonderful life. He was an adventurer. He was always enthusiastic about Polynesian research, even right up till, you know, the time that he passed away. He would always talk about his past adventures and the more things that he wanted the younger scientists to research. So, he was a wonderful role model for me, and he was always humorous, humble, and he was a really nice person. And Marguerite herself was a amazing storyteller. I remember when I used to be living at their house, we would have breakfast with her, and she just kept me wrapped with attention until about lunchtime. So, so she always had incredible stories of her past history in Tahiti, all the different people. And Kenneth and Marguerite had uh, a lot of contemporaries that were um, people that we know, like Jack London. Uh, I heard Jacques Cousteau was one of Kenneth's competitors for Marguerite, but Kenneth won. And and later he became the very famous aquatic scientist, right? And also James Norman Hall and Armstrong Sperry and all these people that were pretty prominent back then were all their acquaintances and friends. So he had a very interesting circle of friends. So my association with the Emorys was over 35 years. I grew up with them because I was just about like I was 7 when I came, and um, from that time it's 35 years until Kenneth passed. So it was a really a wonderful time for me, and I still love and appreciate Kenneth and Marguerite. But there's some pretty funny stories about Kenneth that maybe only I and a few other people know. And one is, a lot of people know this though. Kenneth was a chocolate freak. If you went to his office and looked in his top drawer, it was full of half-eaten chocolate bars. And every place we went, he would disappear. And when we found him, he would be at a store buying chocolate bars, or at the corner drugstore eating chocolate ice cream. He even did that during the Pacific Science Congress in Japan. Every time we made a stop and we had to get back on the bus, he'd be missing. And we'd all go, oh, he's trying to find ice cream or chocolate. Sure enough, that's what he was doing. The other thing he was known for was his brass whistle. When he took his students or interested people on tours, he always had a brass whistle. And if they weren't paying attention, he would blow it. Even until in his 80s, he was a trucker. He could walk faster and hike faster than anybody. So he'd get way ahead of the pack, and then when they weren't catching up, he'd stop and blow the whistle. So that was another one of his traits. The other one was Kenneth was a scary driver. And I have one memorial letter that I wanted to read because it sort of proves my point. From the time I was small, whenever we rode with Kenneth, I kind of noticed that all the adults always sat in the back seat. And I was a kid, so I always sat next to Kenneth in front. And you know, those days there were no seat belts, and a lot of the intersections were manned by policemen directing traffic. Well, Kenneth's favorite thing to do when he drove was he would be always moving around. His hands would be twitching on the wheel. I don't know if he was just nervous, but or that was just his normal behavior. But whenever someone was in the back seat, he would pretty much completely turn around and talk to that person while the car was going full speed forward. And we would all go, Kenna, turn around, watch the traffic. And it was so humorous because a lot of the police guys directing traffic in the intersection knew his car. So sometimes he wouldn't pay any attention to the signals and drive by, and they would yell at him, Emory. So in those days, you know, life was more simple and Honolulu was smaller. So I'd say most of the policemen knew his car and knew him. And, you know, oh, one other thing that probably hardly anybody else knows. I never saw anyone put on socks the way Kenneth used to put on socks. You know, but most of us stick our foot through the top of the socks, right? He put the socks on toe first. He would turn the socks inside out, sticks his stick his toes in the toe part, and then pull the whole thing back up his ankle. And I was thinking, wow, that's amazing. I never saw anybody do that. But he he always did that. Just the trivia that no one knows. Oh yeah, I wanted to read you the memorial anecdotes from Roger Green and Dick Shuttler. So Dick Shuttler was archaeologist from Simon Fraser University, and he knew Kenneth and my dad well. He really specialized in a lot of carbon dating, and his field was more like in Fiji Tonga area, but they always consulted one another. Yeah, I wanted to read you this book. I mean this letter. It says in January 1952. Sorry, I can't see this. Sorry. Okay. When Professor Gifford and I arrived in Honolulu on our way to New Caledonia, Kenneth met us at the airport and drove us to the Moana Hotel. For the next few days, Kenneth drove us around Honolulu to the Bishop Museum, to Sir Peter Buck's home, etc. He says, riding with Kenneth was an adventure. He had the habit of bouncing up and down on his driver's seat and never watching the road. We figured the only way he and his other drivers on the road survived was that everyone in Honolulu knew Kenneth's car and took appropriate measures when they saw it coming. And it says a second fond memory related to the tour of the Honshu sites in Japan. This is during the 10th Pacific Congress. He said our group included Kenneth, and we went up the coast, east coast of Honshu, across the island via Lake Kawada. As soon as And it says down the West Coast, almost every departure to our next stop, Kenneth would be missing. We soon learned the lesson and the reason where to look for him. Kenneth was a chocolate freak, so we would send out scouts to find the closest place to get chocolate ice cream or a chocolate bar, and there would be Kenneth. He says, I treasure my 40 years of friendship with Kenneth Emory. He was one of the kindest persons I have ever known. So it's a nice, but humorous tribute to Kenneth. Yeah. And here's one from Roger Green. He says, in 1958, my mentor, Douglas Oliver, sent me to the Pacific to learn about his archaeology before joining his anthropology group, then beginning their work in the Society Islands. It was arranged that travel to New Zealand would be via Hawaii, so I could spend time with Kenneth Emory and his archaeological team at Nololokai on Kauai. He said, Oliver had insisted that my initiation into Pacific archaeology had to be done by Kenneth, and the memory of it is still clear. And he says he met us at the Kauai airport and whisked us off to Waimea, somehow negotiating a passage along the road while turning around to tell me about Hawaii, Kauai, its plants, its people. We experienced all those who have driven with Kenneth can readily experience. It was an amazing performance. We stayed that night in a Koke cabin up the Waimea Canyon, and it was well nigh dark when he came to wake me up. He said, let's get up now, we have to go. And so they stumbled up a visible path to a nearby point to watch the sun come up over Waimea and listen to the calling of the birds and the crowing of the Polynesian wild chickens. I have not forgotten it. One saw and heard why Kenneth loved his Hawaii. When it was back to the car and onto a little coastal port where we embarked on a small boat with an outboard piloted by one of Kenneth's local friends. So it says, looking back at it now, I know that in the first 24 hours with Kenneth, I was hooked. If this was Polynesian archaeology, why should anyone work in the Southwest or Mesoamerica as previously planned? Once again, as Oliver probably anticipated, Kenneth had worked his magic and another committed Pacific archaeologist was captured. Years later, I realized what lay behind the insistence of having him provide my first introduction to the region. Kenneth was a spell that could and has lasted a lifetime. So it's another wonderful tribute, yeah, to Kenneth from a colleague. During one of his trips, he visited the Pacific Equatorial Islands, Palmyra, Washington, Fanning, Christmas, Starbuck, Vostok, and the Caroline Islands, and Malden. And he stopped at these islands twice, once in 1924 on the Kaimiloa and another in 1934. And I was fortunate enough to be on the westward, another a boat expedition. This time it was a National Geographic expedition from the Mission Museum and Oceanic Institute in 1970 and 1972. And I worked on these islands that Kenneth had visited before. And I relocated almost all of the sites that Kenneth had recorded on Washington and Fanning Island. And in fact, I was able to conduct some excavations on Fanning Island in 1972 with Hawaii Institute of Geophysics team, and found some interesting archaeological data that pointed to that Fanning was likely a stopping point for the early Polynesian migrants that came up from the south to Hawaii, because a lot of the material culture artifacts were very similar. And that island has a large heiau type structure, not with upright slabs, but with large stone slabs that were actually cut like a L-shaped cornerstones and things like that. But that's pretty unusual. But during my work on the island, I noticed that Kenneth said they were shaped on the top, but actually they were part of the natural lamination of limestone. So they weren't shaped vertically, but certainly they were cut horizontally from these quarries in the center of the island under the forest. So we can see that there was that dress stone technique used there too, much like in the Marquesas and the Manahuni ditch on Kauai. Yep. So we can see how the early migrants had come from the Marquesas to Hawaii, and the later migrants came from Tahiti. So during that time, it was really, I was saddened, and really it was unfortunate that the islands further south, like Christmas Island, which is about the largest atoll on Earth, was totally disturbed during the nuclear testing on Bikini. This small, well, not that small, but this atoll has over 15 airstrips that were bulldozed during the atomic testing era. And Malden Island, which is even further south, was one where Kenneth found a lot of spectacular stone remains, and 90% of those were all disturbed too. Post-World War II nuclear testing. So just a little bit on his contribution to historic preservation. It was, way before mandates were enacted for historic preservation in Hawaii. He got a whole group of interested people together, and they would go out and protect sites and be watchdogs to make sure that owners weren't doing something to disturb it. So that too, he was way ahead of time in public education and interest in preservation. And what caused it was actually one of the museum directors,
Hello.
Herbert Gregory. In 1920, he was director of the Visscher Museum, and he convened the Pacific Science Congress. And he exclaimed that the question of Polynesian origins was one of the most important questions to be addressed by science for the Pacific region. So young Kenneth, who was fresh out of Dartmouth, became one of the key scientists to tackle this question. He was a pioneer in his field in the Pacific, and he made really important contribution to anthropology and archaeology in Polynesian islands and the Central Pacific region in general. He practiced what was known as four-field anthropology, which involved the study of ethnography, linguistics, physical anthropology, and archaeology. And his fieldwork is synthesis of the data, applying spatial or settlement pattern analysis with his very exhaustive collection of oral traditions from knowledgeable informants, preceded almost 4 decades from the time when conventional thinking had caught up to doing those things. So his multidisciplinary, environmental, and holistic approaches to anthropological research was decades ahead of its time. So yeah, so that's my presentation about Kenneth. And if you're interested in learning more, there are many publications that talk about him. In particular, Dr. Patrick Kirch's memoriam upon his death in Asian Perspectives gives a really good summary of his achievements. So I would steer you there. But if you look at almost any books on archaeology or reports, and you look in the bibliography, you'll see a whole bunch of things written by Kenneth. He was a prolific writer, and he has about 150 publications to his name. So it won't be hard to find out more about him. So thank you. And sorry, I kind of went long, but if anyone has questions, I'll be happy to try and answer them.
You mentioned during your presentation that he would suggest areas of research for some of the students. Are there areas that still have not been explored?
Well, techniques and methodologies have really, progressed since his time. But like I said, he was very progressive. He was ahead of his time. So in that respect, I think maybe there's a lot of progress in that way. So not in that kind of case, but Pacific Ocean is a vast area. There are so many uninhabited islands. They're so hard to get to that in that respect, I think there's still a lot of areas that need to be investigated. Unfortunately, a lot of the Central Pacific Islands are atolls. And as you know, they're like really low. And so now, especially with the global warming, a lot of these islands are going underwater. So, it's really critical that something be done urgently, because otherwise everything will be lost. All the data will be lost. And one of the things that he did so well, and unfortunately we're a wrong timing for it, is that he salvaged a lot of firsthand informant testimony from knowledgeable elders who are all gone now. Yeah. So it really shows the importance of the ethnology aspects of doing anthropological and archaeological research.
We have some comments that were in the chat from Rick Feinberg. I think I met your dad at Bishop Museum while on my way to Anuta, Solomon Islands, in 1972. I also met Ken Emory at the museum, and Ken generously gave me a copy of his Bishop Museum monograph on Kapinga Marangi. I eventually connected with such other colleagues as Pat Kirsch, who had recently returned from Anuta, and Roger Green, who ended up serving on my dissertation committee. And
Oh,
he
wow, that's good.
thanks,
Yeah,
says mahalo, Rick Feinberg.
yeah. Kenneth was always available. If he was in, he would always welcome you, tell you stories, and give you copies of his reports. Yeah, he was like Dick Shuttler said, he was one of the kindest people that he knew, and that was true.
Is there a place that the public can access the Lanai survey?
Yeah, the report itself is out of print, but I'm sure probably the Hawaii State Library and the Bishop Museum Library has it, and probably the Hawaiiana collection at the Hamilton Library at the UH. I'm sure they have it. It was a bulletin, but it was reprinted years ago by the Museum Press too. but there haven't been any more recent reprinting of it.
Do you have any more anecdotes concerning the relationship with him and your father?
Yeah, it was really funny that in those days when you went by steamship from Japan to California, there was 1 week of layover, and he had already made contacts with certain people in Hawaii, and they told him, "Hey, there's a kind of a brand new excavation going on the island of Hawaii. So why don't you go meet Kenneth there and look at what they're doing?" So he said, "Yeah, for sure." So he went to the Big Island, but he wasn't too proficient in English yet then. So when his friend told him to catch the plane to Kona, he didn't really know what was going on. So he thought he meant his friend told him to catch the plane on the corner. So so he went around the side of the airport building, caught a plane, and ended up in Hilo. And he waited and waited for Kenneth and never saw him. But then he remembered, hey, there must be a Japanese newspaper here, so I can talk to somebody. So he called them up, and they sure knew because his friend in Honolulu had called them up to tell him this guy he was coming, this Japanese archaeologist coming. But they didn't know he was going to come to Hilo. But the guy came and put him on a jitney, uh, and he went from Hilo to Kau Naalehu on one of those Filipino jitneys, and he said, "Wow, that was a kind of a fun time because, they stop and go, pick up people, drop off people." So he finally got there, and Kenneth picked him up in Naalehu and then took him down the dusty road to South Point, and then he kidnapped him. He wouldn't let him go back in time to catch his ship. So it's funny if you see pictures of my dad during that time working, he'll have on like two different pairs of slippers. And he said, "Yeah, those are roadkill because my slippers all went to California, so I had to find slippers on the beach." And, and he was wearing like hand-me-down clothing from Bill Bonk, who was like 6'5", and my dad is like 5'2". So he had a lot of problems with clothing until his bags came back from California.
Well, thank you again for a wonderful talk, and I'll let Andrea close off today's session.
Thank you so
Hello,
much,
everybody.
Aki. These wonderful anecdotal memories are so special. I'm so glad that we're recording this. I hope everyone enjoyed today's presentation. Thank you to Ralph. Thank you to Michelle, my colleague at HHF, who has been providing technical support. And believe it or not, next week is our final sixth lecture in the lecture series this year. So we hope you'll join us at noon next Wednesday. We're going to hear a presentation by Douglas Askman on King David Kalakaua. And again, for those who are new, please sign up for HHF's e-newsletter at historichawaii.org if you're not signed up yet, so you can stay up to date on programs like this. And please consider supporting HHF by donating or becoming a member. And you can visit the Join Us section at historichawaii.org to learn more. The lecture was recorded, and I will be uploading it to YouTube. So maybe in either later today or tomorrow for those who are interested. And again, thank you so much, Aki. That was really special. And mahalo to you too, Ralph. And a hui ho, everyone.
Thank you, Michelle, Andrea, Ralph. That was
Our
fun.
pleasure. Our pleasure. And please take the survey for those logging off. Mahalo nui
Okay.
loa. Hui ho.
Yeah, we hope.